Hello and welcome to this story of my life. This is it. This is the one, if you've been going through in order, this is the one that you'd want to wait for, or you might have gone forward to it straight away because it's you'll be able to see them. They're listed on YouTube. This is it. This is one of the most profound stories of my life. It is one of the most pivotal moments of my life, and it is one of the things that has served me well over the course of the last 7 or 8 years. And I'm very proud to say that a man called Frank Trainor inspired me to do what it is that I've been doing, and this is the story of that. Now, as you all have heard in my opening statement about why I'm doing this channel, Frank Trainor was pivotal in my life, an absolute giant of a man in my personal development. There were many, many things that Frank Trainor told me as a boy that just stuck with me my whole life. Things like asking for help is a sign of greatness. Asking for help is a sign of a great man. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise, right? Things like that. So what I'm going to share with you is something that Frank said to me when I was 14 years old, and I'll then go on to some other things about him. So as I described, and you would have listened to in my opening, Frank Trainor married my grandmother, Ella Castle, when I was 12, and I was so pleased to have another grandfather, and no less than an Anzac yet, the most respected members of our community. I got to have one as a grandfather. So as I said, I offered to mow the lawns and do the chores around the house, knowing that I'd get a chance to be with and talk to the great man. And I cherished those conversations. He'd sit there and talk to me and listen to me and I'd ask him questions and be at him all the time. Tell me about this, tell me about that, tell me about something else. At him. And never did he show any sign of frustration at that. I'm sure that after I left, he went into my grandmother and said, that boy, he's a real avochat. He really wants to have a talk all the time. I'm sure he did that. But I loved that man very much. And so anyhow, when I was about 14, he sat down and he had this conversation with me. And it went, I'll paraphrase it a little bit, but it went kind of like this. He looked at me and he said, "Peter, let me tell you a story." And I said, "Sure." And he said, when the Japs were coming down through Malaysia and we were in Singapore, we had to bug out of Singapore. We managed to get on a ship, a destroyer, and we were pulling out of Singapore, heading back down to, I think, Borneo they were going to go to, or maybe New Guinea, I can't remember. He said, pulling out, he said, we were unlucky enough to be spotted by a Japanese fighter. And the Jap pilot decided, let's kill as many of these men as I can. And there was nowhere to go. No room downstairs. That's where all the guys were working, running the ship. So we just had to lay down on the deck, across the deck, make ourselves a smaller target because he was going to go fly from end to end. We just had to lay down on the deck and take our chances. So we did. And he went across us 4 or 5 times until he ran out of ammunition, and he just strafed us. We were just laying on the deck and he just strafed us, shot whatever he could shoot on the deck, trying to kill as many men as he could. And as he left and we could hear the engine receding in the distance, I said a small prayer to myself and said, "Thank God I'm still alive." And I stood up, and my mates on either side of me were dead. The two guys next to me on either side were both dead. And by this time, he had tears in his eyes, and he looked at me and he said, "Peter, you see something like that? It really fucks you up." What he said. And I listened. Didn't have an answer. I mean, I was 14. What do you answer when you're 14 and your grandfather tells you that? And he said, "I want you to remember," excuse me. He said, "I want you to remember something." He said, "Those lads, when those lads died, your mum and your dad, they were little. They were kids. Those lads had no children of their own, no wife or children of their own. Those two mates of mine. They were there fighting just like me for the likes of your mother and your father and the children of their land. They were there fighting to make sure that you wouldn't live in Japanese occupation. They took their chances just like I took my chances. And I'm here and they're not. So I want you to promise me something." Said those those boys, they gave their lives so that your mum and your dad could have a good life. And your mum and your dad, they have had a good life. You know that. I know that. Your mum and dad have had a very good life. And you, I wish you a good life too. I hope you have a good life too. You're a youngster coming through. I hope you have a good life too. But those boys didn't get a chance. So I want you to promise me, if ever there is a need for you to defend the children of your land like these men defended your mum and your dad, I want you to do it. I want you to do it because to do less would be to dishonour my mates who died next to me. This is not my message I'm giving to you. It's theirs. They took their chances. They fought and died in hopes of a better future for the children of their land. And I want you to be willing to do the same should the need ever arise in honour of my fallen comrades. And to not do so, I would feel would dishonour my fallen comrades. And I just nodded. Yeah, of course, I would do that. He didn't have to ask me to promise him. I'd do it anyway, right? I've always... Frank knew what sort of character I was by then. And he knew that I always defended those less able to defend themselves. He knew I was a righteous young boy. And he knew that I knew right from wrong. Which is, I rather suspect, why he gave me that little lecture. And, when the great man was telling me this story and he had tears in his eyes, you could see he was back there. He's remembering his mates, remembering what it was like. And what must it be like to just lay on the deck of a ship and be strafed and then you survive and your two mates, one on either side, don't. As he said, you see something like that, it does F you up, right? It does F you up. And that was part of Frank's problems, was he had quite some post-traumatic stress from being in the war, which everybody understood was reasonable and required empathy and sympathy. He did tell me other stories about his mates who died next to him. The most horrific was the following one. He didn't tell me these to make him out to be good. He told me these to let me know. This is what men did for your mother and your father. This is what they went through. Okay, that's what he was doing. So anyhow, another story that he told me was this. They were fighting across in New Guinea. And in New Guinea, of course, it was very mountainous. And so oftentimes, the opposing sides would be on opposite sides of a ridge. And the great mass of the men couldn't see each other. So both sides would have spotters on top of the ridge calling out where to lob mortars. And a favourite of the Japanese, apparently, according to him, were fragmentation mortars, proximity mortars, which would explode in the air rather than hit the ground and explode, because the ground was relatively soft in places and these things would hit the ground and explode, not do much damage. But if you could get a proximity mortar to explode in the air, then all hell would break loose, right? Because the fragments would just rain down on the guys underneath. And he told me that what used to happen, they'd be fighting each other like this, and what used to happen was there's no time to dig into the ground or find any cover or anything else like that. If you could find a bit of rock or something to get under, great. But basically the lads would just lay on the ground in amongst the jungle, and the Japanese and our lads would be doing the same, lobbing mortars over the ridge or over the top of the hill or whatever it was, lobbing mortars over each other, trying to bomb each other, because there was no direct line of fire. So he said they just used to lay on the ground and take their chances. And these things would explode, and some guys would die, or some guys would be injured, and some guys would survive. And he said, he's describing this to me one day, and he said, the guys who are hit, usually these things don't kill you. He said they do you a lot of damage, but they don't kill you. You bleed to death. And he said, a lot of the times I was laying there, and one of my mates would be not far away, and there's no way you could evacuate them or get them out or anything else like that. They'd be badly hit and they're going to bleed to death. He said, as they got weaker and weaker, all the little jungle animals would come out and start eating on them. And they weren't strong enough to shoo the jungle animals away. So like rats and mice and stuff like that. And he said, it's just watching it, it's just because, there's mortars coming over you. You don't want to go anywhere. It's just a horrible, horrible way to die. Bleeding out on the jungle floor from a mortar fragment. Horrible, horrible way to die. He said, I saw that quite a few times. I saw my mates die like that quite a few times. He said, this is what these men went through. This is how it was. And so when it came my turn to defend the children of my land, I remember back to what Frank Trainor said to me. I remember back to him telling me how plenty of his mates died in order to defend my mother and my father when they were little children, and my mother and my father went on to have a good life. They went on to have me, and I went on to have a life that few people get to live. I've had a great life. There's not many men have a better life than me. So when we now have an enemy domestic, that was Frank Trainor, and his fallen comrades were my inspiration to battle as hard as I could to defend the children of my land. And an interesting thing was, when I was going off to do the court case, one of my colleagues at the client I was at, won't say his name, call him Fred. One of my colleagues at the court case I was at, he knew what I was about to do. I told him, I'd gone to him and said, I've done clean up all the work, there's nothing left outstanding. I said, just so you know, this is what I'm doing. And he was really shocked. And I said, just so you know, I might be jailed for a long time or worse for doing this. And he looked at me and he said, that's kind of one of the bravest things I've ever heard a man's going to do. Walk into a court and video record the proceedings and try and catch the magistrate committing a crime. He's like, it's a pretty brave thing. And I went, well, not really. I said, my step-grandfather and his mates fought right across Southeast Asia during World War II. That's what I call bravery. I said, I'm going to walk into an air-conditioned courtroom. It's a kind of different thing, right? And he said to me, he laughed and he said to me, he said, yes, okay, I admit that is a different thing, but it still takes a lot of guts to walk into a court of your own government and try and video record them committing a crime. He said, that's going to take a lot of guts. I went, yeah, and charging onto the beaches of Normandy took a lot of guts as well. And men did it. Now it's my turn. So that's kind of how that went. So that was the story of Frank Trainor telling me that. It was a great story. And it really, really had a huge impact on my life. Now that aside, so we finished that, I'll just say a little bit more about Frank Trainor. Frank loved fishing. My uncle, obviously my grandmother's son, my grandmother's daughter married a guy called Laurie Little, so this was the son-in-law. He had a boat, and Frank loved fishing. And because Uncle Laurie couldn't go, you can't go out on a boat alone. You have to have a companion in a boat going out to sea to go fishing. And Frank used to love to go out fishing with Laurie in the times when I couldn't go. And and of course, being ex-serviceman, he'd take charge of anything that he did, right? Frank was always in charge, large and in charge with Frank Trainor. And so ran everything like he was in the army. And so on the event of his 65th birthday, which we thought was something really worth celebrating, he had his 65th birthday, and we had it at my parents' place. All the relatives came over. And Uncle Laurie's son, my cousin, of course, Graham, and we were born just a couple of months apart, we cooked up this scheme to give him a birthday present. And the scheme was, because we're kids, we didn't have any money. The scheme was, we went down to the surplus store and we bought this jacket. Looked like a bit of an admiral's jacket, and we fixed tassels to it, etc. And we bought medals, etc., for this jacket, and bought a white admiral's hat, etc. And so the outfit was, the admiral. The whole story was, he's the admiral. He's large and in charge on the boat. He's the captain of the ship, but not just the captain of the ship. He's the admiral. He's always in charge and running things. And but not only did we get this hat and this jacket for him, but what we did was we got a box from one of our mates, the box that a refrigerator comes in, okay, and which is huge. It's nearly 6 feet tall and very wide. It's the packing box for a refrigerator. And so we made out, there were 6 of us. We when it came time to give Frank his birthday present from Graham and I, we made out that we put on the back of this ute, and we had to bring the ute down the driveway, and took 6 of us struggling. We're all pretending to struggle. 6 of us struggling to lift this thing, 3 on either side, and get it up into the house, right? To bring this huge, big, heavy birthday present into the house, struggling to get this thing into the house. Right? And Frank's like, "What the hell are you boys bought? What have you boys done?" Right? And so he was playing it up into the whole thing, and it was fantastic. And it was all packed in wrapping tape, etc. So you had to cut this thing open, and cut it open, and pull the panel back, and we'd affixed the hat and the coat inside on these hooks, so that it would be sitting there when he managed to open it. And he's just laughing. He's like, once he saw it was a hat and the coat, he's realised that we're kidding him about the weight of the thing, and he's put on the hat and he's put on the coat, and "I'm in charge. We're taking the ship out. We're going fishing today." And he's playing up as only Frank could do. I mean, it was a fabulous thing. And he's like, "Thanks, boys. That's just a great birthday present. I really appreciate it." And that was November. I think it was November 1981. So Frank had this big birthday, and it was really very good. So anyhow, just finishing the story, I went off to work, and I've already done my story of my life of my getting my first job there in January 1982, and I went off to work, and in I think it was March or April, I'd only been at work for a couple of months, 3 months, and I got a call, and the call was, "Uncle Frank is in the hospice, and he's dying. If you want to see him, then you should come now." So I went, okay. And because my home was 440 kilometres from where I worked in Wollongong, so I've only just started working, so obviously I can't get a day off. And so I decided, well, I'll drive home on the Saturday morning, I'll go see Frank, and then I'll drive back to work on the Sunday, drive back to Wollongong on the Sunday on my motorbike. I just managed to buy a motorbike. And so maybe I rode home on the Friday night, I can't remember, it's long ago. But on the Saturday, I went to see Frank in the hospital, in the section that we all knew you don't come out of. And so I went to see him, and he was laying there. And I was there, I was 18 and 3 months, I was just a few months out of home, and I was there to try and cheer him up and say, this will be okay, you'll get better, etc. And so I was there, "Hi Frank, how are you? Great to see you. What are you doing laying around on the job? You get off your ass and get better, and wanting to see you home again, yeah?" And he smiled and he said, "I've had enough." He said, "They keep cutting pieces off me. This is no way for a man to live." It's time for me to be with my mates again, he said. And with that, he rolled over and went to sleep. That was my last visit and last words with the great man. And I sat there for about an hour. I sat there and just said, okay, there's nothing left to say. The other thing he said, sorry, I missed a bit out. He said, you boys gave me the best birthday party I ever had, and I don't want another one. That's something else he said while I was there, which is great that he felt that way. So, he just rolled over. The great man rolled over and went to sleep. And I stayed for about an hour. I guess more to comfort myself than to comfort him, because he was asleep. And then I left. And of course, that was the last time I saw him alive. He died 2 weeks later. And of course, I went on the event of his death. I asked for 2 days in lieu, 2 days without pay. And what they did was they just said, well, we'll take it off your holiday pay when you get your holidays. So they actually gave me 2 days off to go down to his funeral and come home again. So that's kind of how that worked. And that was the last of Frank Trainor in his life. But I think the important thing of this story is to understand that back in World War II, there was many men fought hard, died, doing what they thought was the right thing. Certainly they had no chance of knowing otherwise. And their story from the battlefield came through Frank Trainor to me. And I look at myself very much as these boys who died in World War II, next to Frank Trainor. Plenty of Australian men died in World War II. Sure, it was a contrived war, but they didn't know that. And they did their best and paid the ultimate sacrifice, paid the ultimate price and made the ultimate sacrifice, such that my mum and dad could have a good life. So disappointing that my dad, as a 70-year-old man who's had an excellent life all his life, could have no complaints about his life, had a much better life than his father had, or virtually any man his generation had a very good life. When he was the beneficiary of that sort of sacrifice, that my father can't even stand up and say, hey, don't criminally victimise my son, that's not okay around here. That not even my own father can do that. It's just a terrible, terrible disgrace that not even my own father would do that. Men died for him, and he won't even speak in public to protect his son or his grandchildren. It's just a complete disgrace. Nothing to be really said about that. So yeah, Frank, the message of those men who died on the battlefield came down to me from Frank Trainor. Now, a very interesting thing was this woman that I refer to as my fave number one. When I told her the story that is also available on Stories of My Life, it's why I do what I did, and I said to her, men died in World War II to give me my chance, and I mentioned in that story that her grandfather fought in World War II and told her of the horrors that they went through. One of the stories she repeated to me was this, and that was her grandfather said that in Stalingrad, her grandfather fought in Stalingrad, and everybody knows the story of Stalingrad. So he said in Stalingrad, what the Russians would do is they would take refuge in the churches in the night, the men who were fighting. And he told her that, of course, during the night, some of the men would die, and they'd be stiff in the morning. So, of course, the ground was frozen, etc. So he said, we would just take them out, and we had a pile of dead men out the back. So we would just throw the men on the pile of the dead men out the back. That's what he said to her. And when she told me this story about what her grandfather had said to her, of course, she was crying when she was listening, when she was repeating this story. Because it's the same as me, she loved her grandfather. And in repeating the story, she's reliving the moment that her grandfather had told her this story. And of course, it's very emotional and affecting when you try and repeat these stories that these men who fought in these horrendous conditions tell you. So she was crying a little bit when she's telling me this. And she said to me, how could anyone treat a human being like this? How could anyone treat a man like this, that he has died? He's been fighting in the war and he's died, and you just throw him on a pile like some rubbish? How can people be treated like this? And I said to her, well, the question isn't how can people be treated like this, because no women are treated like that. Only men are treated like that. Your grandfather didn't say that, there were women fighting and women dying and women being thrown on the pile like that. That's something exclusively for men. And she looked at me and I said, yeah, you have one son. And I hope and pray that that's not his fate. But every single man, your grandfather talked about this, every single man thrown on that pile had a mother. And she nodded. She goes, I know. She goes, I can't believe that that's how men's lives were ending. And I went, yeah, nobody really cares about men very much. We're disposable. And I related this back to what I was talking about with that at that time about the family courts. And I said to her at that time, I said, when a man commits suicide from the criminal abuse of the family courts, his mother doesn't speak out against what happened to him in the lead up, and she won't speak out even if she has other sons who are married. So just think about that for a minute. Think about how in Australia, not even even if a man kills himself and it's clear what happened, not even his mother will say anything about it, even if she's got other married sons who might suffer the same fate. The women will not speak out about this stuff. And she just nodded and said, that's really terrible. I went, yeah, it is really terrible. It is really terrible. So there's Faith number one, and I have a very close connection in terms of, we got the same, not the same, but we got an extremely similar message from our grandfathers about what their comrades went through, the hell on earth that they fought through, the appalling and abominable conditions they died in, and then, in the case of Australians in Borneo and places like that under shell fire, it's not like you take those guys out and bury them anytime soon, right? Have to, if you can bury them, you take them out, evacuate them, bury them later. Or in Stalingrad, places like that, the bodies were just thrown onto a pile. There's no way to bury them. And perhaps they were buried later, perhaps they were just burned later. Who knows what happened to a lot of those men who died in Stalingrad. So this Faith number one, and I had a very strong connection from that point of view of having been explained what our grandfathers and their comrades had gone through in order to secure the future of our parents. And it was that close for us. For me, it was my parents, and for her, it was her parents, because her parents are a bit younger than me. Her father has died, but her mother's a bit younger than my mother. So I don't think her mother was born during World War II, but of course her grandmother was alive and well in World War II, just like her grandfather, there fighting. So that's kind of the story of Frank Trainor. Such a huge presence in my life. Just going down mowing the lawns for my grandmother, getting a chance to be around an Anzac and listen to what an Anzac had to say. And then earning his respect enough for him to ask me, would I promise to do the same as his comrades had done, should ever the need arise, which I felt was understood anyway, and not needed to be asked. But to actually honour me to ask me that, because as far as I know, no other of my cousins report that he said similar things to them. None of my other cousins tell me, oh yeah, Frank said the same to me, right? I don't know that anybody else took the time out to go spend time with the great man, listen to him and learn from him as much as what I did. So, 36 minutes really. I was just been sitting here in my chair talking about this on my headset. So I hope you like that. I mean, if a story like that doesn't, from a man like that, doesn't get you in the heart, if that isn't something that you say, wow, that's really worth hearing, that's really worth listening to, because these were the greatest generation. These were the men who fought the greatest conflict of all time. If that isn't something that men want to hear and understand and learn from, I got no idea what is. Sure, you'd want to hear from Jenna Marbles and her inanity, but you want to learn how to be a man, you listen to the words of a man like Frank Trainor, you'll learn how to be a man. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening.